And after the Mexican crisis, we had two more crises. Crisis like the one the U.S. is living now. Financial crisis. Crisis because we had very low rates of savings, because we had a lot of debt. We had a big crisis that started in Asia and Russia and came to Brazil and then to the Andean countries at the end of the 90s, in 1998, 99. Then we had a big crisis in Argentina in 2001. And this big financial crisis made a lot of damage to the ideals of democracy, to the ideas of improving the lives of people. It's good to put one thing clear. We started with the big financial crisis at the beginning of the 80s. In 81, the first Mexican crisis, the first country that decided not to pay the debt and had a debt crisis, that was Mexico in 81. And then through 2002, there were 25 years of bad growth, 20 years of bad growth. Growth that was 2% a year at the most, 2.5%, 3%. That was not enough to solve social problems, that make a lot of damage to the economic model, to democracy. Started this idea that democracy was not delivering, that the economic model we were using, that was basically having good economic policy, that was a wrong policy, and brought all that insecurity. And some of the problems we are living with democracy in some of the Latin American countries today, and I prefer to address those problems of those countries in the period of questions. But some of the problems we have today are because of that, because democracy did not deliver on solving social problems, and because the economic policy we practice since the 80s, and with the period of globalization, and with the free trade, and with all the rules of economics, that was not working. And at least people had the idea that was not working. So the things we have done were wrong. So this was a very difficult period for democracy. It's recent, but created a lot of uncertainty, and are part of the reason why in Latin America, still now, there is certain ambiguity in relation to capitalism, certain ambiguity in relation to markets, and the financial crisis in New York is not helping a lot to that idea that the markets are not always right, that the regulation is not always a good idea, that competition does not solve everything, and is bringing back a discussion that I hope it will be helpful and not damaging to the type of countries and economies and societies we are trying to build. We have a lot to learn. I mean, since 2002, and I'm going to put that year a little arbitrarily, Latin America started to grow much better. For the first time after 20 years of difficult times, Latin America started to grow strongly. Not every country, but most countries. Argentina and Brazil took time, but in the last 3 years has been doing very well. Chile, that was growing well since the 70s, kept growing well. Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, almost every Central American country, Dominican Republic, Panama, Mexico has found quite difficult to grow well, and that is a problem I prefer to talk a little later. But Latin America was started to have a lot more confidence and to start to grow much better and to have better financial institutions. We learn these things of financial globalization in the very hard way. We have 4 crises, one in the 80s, the Mexican crisis, the Brazilian and Andean countries crisis, the Argentinian crisis. All these things we are seeing, we live it 4 times. of course not with the same intensity in every country, but 4 times. And everybody say, no, you handle things badly. You don't know how to do it. I mean, we never got any comprehension, well, with one exception. Mexico, the Clinton administration really helped Mexico when had the financial crisis in 1995 and took the right decision of helping the Mexicans, and in 2 years Mexico was back doing much better. But the other crises were bad, and probably I'm going to talk about later. But we still need to learn a lot how to grow better. We have to compare us with Asia, not with Europe, that is satisfied growing 2% a year. We don't want that, as the US does not want. They have their model, they have their way of doing things, they are mature economies, they are pleased to grow 2% a year and think that is enough. We don't want that. We need to compare with Asia, and we still have a lot to learn. We need to learn how to save more. That is the main vulnerability Latin America has. The financial crisis comes because you don't save enough. The financial crisis of this country is because of that, because this country does not save. Everything goes to debt. This country does a lot of consumption out of debt, and that creates vulnerabilities that you see in this country at this moment, and the Latin America have learned in a very difficult way. The highest rates of savings in Latin America is Chile. It's 27% of the national product, but China has 40%. And that makes the very significant difference. Sometimes you hear about miracles, that China is a miracle. No, China is not a miracle. China saves 40% of the national product, and they put that money in investment. So they do what they do because they save money, they save a lot. It's difficult. And also the Japanese and all the Asian countries have very high rates of savings. The Japanese have more than 30%, and almost every other country has very high rates of savings. And that is a problem we need to solve, because that volatility of capitals, that financial crisis that come one after the other comes out not only of mistakes of economic policy, but the lack of savings. We need to face this idea of international competition. I mean, it's difficult to understand why Mexico is not growing better, why Mexico only grows 3 or 3.5 or 4%, being integrated with the US economy, and the only good explanation is the very strong international competition is receiving from China and India and the Asian powers. That is becoming a big threat. At some moment, Brazil was finding the same problems as Mexico, but is doing better. In this crisis, is doing better. It's starting to grow more than 5%, and I think that idea that these big emerging economies are the future, China and India and Russia and South Africa and Brazil and Mexico, of course, it's starting to hold.